Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The 2020 election is underway, and millions of Americans will take to the polls in the coming months to vote for President of the United States. Amongst the noise, though, I think we should ask ourselves, what do the results in Iowa and Nevada really mean? Is there any meaning? And do political campaigns truly have the ability to change the minds of voters? Or is it all for naught? This was all sparked by a good piece in the Wall Street Journal, and you can follow along at thestateofus.org. So we're going to look today at this upcoming election, and again, do political campaigns really actually have the ability to change people's minds? But of course, we couldn't begin a conversation on politics, the election, and possibly even Donald Trump without
True Chat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, it's about time, I guess, we had to talk about the election, huh? Been trying to put it off because it's such a long season.
It is.
I mean, it really is. And people have been talking about it for 6 months, but I guess it is time to address some situations. And the article is very interesting. So I would very much encourage people to go to the website and pull it up and read it, because it's got some eye-opening things in it as we talk about the election and who the Democrats will finally settle on to run against President Trump.
Campaigns are going to spend about $6 billion in the U.S. this year, despite research that shows that ads seldom change the minds of voters. And when I say seldom, I mean almost never. And that's what we're going to look at in the back half of the show today. But we thought it'd be helpful to start with, let's talk about some of the current messaging and what's going on. Now, granted, we're not going to talk a lot about just, full disclosure. We're not going to talk a lot about the Republican side of things, because I think that somebody's lying to you if they're going to say that Trump doesn't get the nomination.
Right. So, it's pretty much a done deal.
Right. There's just not a lot to
talk about. William Weld is out there.
Right.
But I don't think it's.
Yeah. So our main focus is going to be on the Democratic field, and specifically what we took away from Iowa and New Hampshire. You want to start with your takeaways, or you want me to go, Lance? What's your feeling? Usually you like when I say stuff, because then you can kind of pick it apart a little bit. And
I'll go first. I don't care. Okay, but it's Iowa was a fiasco. Just for the Democratic Party as a whole.
Great start to the primary season, huh?
What I find
really instills confidence.
That would be my first thing, right? My biggest takeaway is that we allow two of the smaller electoral college states to define who is going to represent the two major political parties in the biggest political race that we have every 4 years.
That's gotten a lot of attention too.
It's just really, when you look at, even with, Republicans' numbers are always smaller, but when you look on the Democratic side, almost 2,000 delegates needed to get the nomination. And they've picked 50?
Right.
60 total, something like that. And I'm sorry, folks, but I should be better prepared that way. But
I think it's just shy of 50 right now.
There's hardly any decisions been made. And it's like, oh my gosh, now we're down to these people and this is all that it is. And it's such a mess. And it's like, well, wait a minute, they need 1,965 or something delegates to win the convention. And we have three people who have, around 15 each or something like that. And we're already trying to declare a winner. And that's really unnerving, to me. Let the process unfold, let it take place. And let's see what happens.
So you've got, as it stands right now, just so that everybody's on the same page, lay the groundwork a little bit, because I think a lot of people don't quite understand how the nominating process works. So the way
we won't even get into the difference between a caucus and
Well, that's a whole episode probably on its own.
Exactly.
People are like, what's a caucus? Especially if you're not in one of those. And even maybe if you're in one of those states, you don't know what a caucus is.
Exactly.
But
after Iowa this year, if you thought you knew what a caucus was, now you're not even sure.
I do think the idea of caucusing is interesting because of the kind of the back and forth, right? And the 2 rounds that we go through and the possibility of changing camps and the very public nature of it is so the opposite of
think of the convoluted method that we go.
Oh yeah.
To pick a nominee. You don't even have the same process taking place in state by state.
It varies from each state.
When you have a certain time of when these different states are taking place so that they can be the first of this or the first of that, and then all of a sudden they carry political weight as well.
Right. So the way it works. So
anyway,
for anybody who's
I'm interrupting you, but with that, but it's just like, go ahead, whichever take you want to go.
Bizarre.
I'm kind of just bouncing off the wall right now with my takes on what's going on.
Well, this is what happens when we wait too long. It just builds up, right? So for people out there who aren't terribly familiar, the way that the nominating process works, at least traditionally, is that you have to get at least 1,990 delegates.
See, I said 2,000. I was close.
In order to win your nomination at the first round of voting at the Democratic National Convention. Okay. Now that all sounds terribly confusing. Basically what it means is there's delegates from each state. Each state has a certain number of delegates that they can award. Okay. And those delegates are chosen depending on the state a little differently, but the reality is you have these delegates, and generally the delegates don't really have any authority other than they are required to vote for who the state puts up in the first round of voting. We'll get to that later. So,
and don't forget, there are, I think, 500 or so super delegates who are tied to nobody, who nobody votes for, who just decide whether or not which candidate they want to support.
And those are usually party elders and, people high ranking in the Democratic field. And of course, that's a pretty big, substantial block.
Well, it's a chunk towards
gets to do.
And that was the whole issue last time in 2016 between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
Was that, Bernie's doing so well in all of these primaries, but the super delegates are all going to vote for Hillary.
Right. So you need 1,990 to win. So far, here's where things stand. Pete Buttigieg is in first place with 22 delegates, followed by Bernie Sanders at 21 delegates, followed by Elizabeth Warren at 8, Amy Klobuchar at 7, and Joe Biden at 6. So there's where things stand. Now, granted, I didn't get into
64.
Right.
Is there anybody that has less than 6?
I don't think so, because I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering correctly, and again, it's not the same in all states, but you have to make, like in New Hampshire, if you don't cross 15%, then you can't.
Different states have different rules and they break them down. Some states are winner take all.
Yes.
But anyhow, let's say you have 2,000 and you have 22 and 21. They've got, real quick math, 1%.
Right.
They are really 99% away from it, and let's declare a winner now.
Right.
It's amazing to me. So that's my biggest takeaway, is that we are sitting here trying to declare somebody a front runner or a winner when nobody has more than 1% of the vote necessary to garner the nomination.
And the other contests are obviously coming up, but it is funny because we talk so much about these states and it's a big deal, or it's made out to be a big deal who wins or loses. But like Lance pointed out, it's such a tiny portion of the total delegates that the biggest thing it does and has done traditionally is narrow down the field. Because the problem, and this is it speaks to the process itself. If you say right now that there's 5 realistic contenders, right? Buttigieg, Sanders, Warren, Klobuchar, and Biden, right? Those are the 5 that are contending at the moment. Now, granted, we've got a couple others like Mike Bloomberg who are going to be contending,
right?
Come Super Tuesday. But if you talk about those 5, if they all 5 stay in the race and keep pulling from states, none of them will cross the 1,990 threshold. What happens then? So the first round of voting takes place. Nobody gets the nomination. Now the zoo begins and the delegates are released, and now nobody knows what's going to happen.
Well, and that's what you're talking about that's what they'll be talking about when you hear the pundits going on about a brokered convention.
Correct.
Meaning that all bets are off. The first round of voting had taken place and nobody got the number necessary. So now it's a free for all. Everybody's on their own, can vote their own independent. But the thing is, being the historian, this happened quite regularly.
Sure.
In the, 19th century. This was not something that was, everybody's like, oh, but with television and everything else, we haven't seen it, in the 20th and the 21st century. It's like, okay, we got to get it all wrapped up. And it behooves us in our informational age to have our candidate early so we can lengthen the campaign season. But a lot of times there are, as you study history, there were many times when it was August, September before each side got a candidate. You had 6 weeks of campaigning and bam, we took a vote as a nation.
Right.
I think a lot of us would like it that way.
Well, see, and that's it behooves, right, based on the current process to narrow down the field prior to getting to the convention, because public sentiment has generally been a lot of confusion around what a brokered convention is and how is that fair and yada, yada,
yada.
Well,
and you're chasing dollars.
Right.
Because if
everybody's spending a lot of time picking each other apart too.
If I do well here, right, you're right. But if I do well here, then I'll get more money and we need money so that we can win. At least that's the current feeling. We're going to talk about that here later in the show, whether or not that really is true. But if I'm making money and then we're not beating each other up so we can concentrate on the opponent.
So coming up next, we're going to talk a little bit more about what some of my takeaways were from Iowa and New Hampshire, get Lance's final thoughts, and then we'll start looking at, does any of this money that's being spent all over the place really make any difference, or is it all for naught? Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
With Iowa and New Hampshire out of the way, a little over 60 delegates have been allocated so far. And just to put that in perspective, there's 1,990 needed to win the nomination for the Democratic nominee. I think it's important to note what Lance said, which is one of the big takeaways that a lot of people have been discussing, right, is that isn't it interesting that in today's age, we still have two states that seem to make a big difference? Whether or not they're going to make as big a difference this time around, that'll be interesting to see, especially with the new wild card, Mike Bloomberg, right, who has decided to just totally disregard the early states.
He's going to play the game altogether by his own set of rules.
That's right.
Which I think is interesting.
Sure.
A lot of people, a lot of the insiders are saying, oh, rah, 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 and grumbling and everything. You can't do it this way. And like, well, looks like he's being pretty confident, because I don't think there's anybody out there that everybody has settled on yet.
No.
Now, if there was a nominee that everybody had settled on, then he may be too late to the dance. But because it appears that nobody has won the hearts of the Democratic Party as of yet, they're going to give Bloomberg an opportunity to speak. But all that being said, what are some of your takeaways for what's going on here?
I guess my two biggest ones are that Buttigieg has surprised people maybe a little bit. A lot of the polling going into it indicated that he should perform decent in these two states, but I don't think it was expected that he would win and or tie in both. And that, or that he would be leading in delegates right now. So I think that's interesting. Again, I think it's, you're talking about a small amount of delegates. So it's important because they're the first states. It's not necessarily important because of how many delegates you get, but it probably means that he'll have the money and perseverance to carry on for a while. And that means that, he's not going to go away in the next 2 or 3 states. We're going to make it to Super Tuesday. We're going to see what happens.
Right.
That much is clear. The other big takeaway is how bad, the former vice president has performed. Again, we looked at the polling, right? So it wasn't a huge surprise that he performed about the way that he was predicted to perform. My surprise was that became the prediction, because this was supposed to be the guy that everybody thought was the safe choice, that he's the one, that's the most electable. And that's what his campaign kept pushing. And here we are, right? And, apparently Iowa and New Hampshire don't feel that way.
Right.
Because we're not talking about a third place finish here, folks, either. We're talking about fifth overall.
But you could say, okay, go ahead. I'll let you finish.
Yeah. It's just, I guess it's disappointing and it's sad. I mean, for me, because I don't have anything major against Joe. I wouldn't say I particularly have a big affinity for him either. And I know some people do. So nothing against that, but it's kind of sad because I kind of see why that's happening. And it's unfortunate because you see somebody like this who's been in politics a long time, who's given it another try, and nobody likes to see, well, I hope not. I mean, you don't like to see that happen to somebody. So, and I guess the other one is that Amy Klobuchar finally is being heard a little bit more. That one's interesting. Bernie and Elizabeth aren't surprising me all that much. I think that's a case of Bernie's securing the furthest left of the party, and Elizabeth can't steal enough away from him, and that's the case of the other three, Klobuchar, Buttigieg, and Biden, are splitting out that moderate vote.
Well, you talk about the surprise of Buttigieg, but him doing so well in Iowa and New Hampshire is probably the worst kept secret out there, because in this case, the pundits were getting it right. Yeah. They were saying 6 weeks ago, he's got the groundwork, he's got the ground forces, he's done the background. Don't be surprised if he does it really, really well.
He was well prepared.
So, it's like, they want to play it up like, look, where are we coming from? But if you really watch this and listen to it since the 1st of January, most of the quote experts that got it so wrong in 2016 were calling for him to do this well. Now, I think New Hampshire, they were a little surprised, but not Iowa, New Hampshire. But again, to do that well in Iowa as a quote surprise candidate to the populace.
Right.
He wasn't to the insiders, but to the populace, it was a surprise how well he did. I think made him more competitive in New Hampshire.
Right.
Now, former Vice President Biden, you say, well, he's just not, first, second, third, he's fifth. But when you go 22, 21, then 8, 7, 6, and in fifth, he's got 6, and third, all you have to do is get 9 or 8.5. He really, it's like 1, 2, and then there's 3 people that are basically in third.
8, 7, 6, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I would say he's more in the running, but what disappoints me as he, you and I have talked, he was my early favorite. He just doesn't sound strong.
He doesn't sound like he used to.
I hadn't, obviously, he hasn't been the vice president for the last 3 years, and he hasn't really been in the public limelight as far as going out there and speaking and showing up at, state funerals and state weddings and things like that and talking to the press. But it was like when he was talking in South Carolina, after the New Hampshire primary, I'm like, oh my gosh, that is not the Joe Biden that I'm used to hearing on the stump. And I was extremely disappointed. Love his ideas. There just wasn't the, and I'm here and I'm hitting my points and the audience is going wild because I'm nailing it, in front of them. And I'm a great public speaker. It was like looking at this person who's like, yeah, I'm here, guys. And I'm really good, aren't I? And that kind of attitude. And I was pulling for him. It was like, come on, man, give me something, give me some life. And I'm afraid that that's where he is right now in life. And I don't know that that's what we need to be president of the United States.
Right. Well, I don't know if that can win the presidency either. I mean, we talk a lot about, and of course the media has been all over that. Part of it is about who can beat Trump. Cause this is all for, you can nominate whoever you want. And if they can't beat Trump, then yippee,
it's all for naught, right?
So I think it gets overplayed, but at the same time, it's also kind of the only thing that matters, because from the Democrat standpoint, you're going to be hard pressed to find Democrats that like Trump. So at the end of the day, what matters to most of them, I think, is making sure that Trump doesn't win. The problem with that, Lance, is I think it's what we talked about in 2016, is you
have to find somebody that people will go vote for.
Right.
And not stay home.
You're playing his game, which is you're playing not to lose instead of to win. You're playing to who can beat Trump as opposed to who can we put forward that rallies Americans to our cause. So I don't know. I told somebody I was at a dinner last night, and I was telling people part of the reason that I am not a Democrat is because the top level leadership in the party gravely continues to disappoint me in their strategy.
But I've been telling you that for 6 years, dude.
I know.
That the Republicans know how to play the game. They just win.
Yeah, that's what they do.
Democrats take the moral high road and do everything by the book or try to. And but the Republicans just say, you know what? We're in this to win.
Well, but
whatever it takes, we're going to win.
They make,
I understand
basic
we can argue,
miscalculations.
but they're so mean or they're nasty. The bottom line is you're supposed to play the game to win.
Right.
The Republicans play to win. The Democrats play to, we want to be right.
Yeah.
Always have.
Right.
And
you're right and you lost.
And exactly.
So a lot of good you're being right's done.
I took the moral high road. Yeah. And now you're back working in the factory while the other person is the president.
Right. So I don't know. I mean, I guess that's been frustrating because people know that I'm not a big fan of Trump, but at the same time, it makes it hard because it's like I don't get a lot of confidence from, I get these emails all the time from both sides, but I get them from the DNC saying support the Unity Fund. And I'm like, go pound sand. I ain't supporting, I'm not giving you guys a blank check. I don't trust you to freaking get the nominee right, let alone, the strategy for the general election.
Yeah.
I mean, because they botched it in 2016. There's no reason, that they should have allowed the electoral math to work out the way it did, but they thought the key was, and now they're making the same mistake again, rally the base. That's what they thought it was, and that's what they're trying to do, and they're going to get beat doing the same damn thing that they did the last time, because there's top level people in the party who have been quoted on and off the record as saying, their main focus is on turning out the base. And by God, if that doesn't irk me to no end, Lance, it's like, that's great that you want to turn out the base, but the way you're going to win is by having a big tent, not a little tent that's VIPs only, with top level security. And that's the type of.
So does it matter though?
Right.
Is Trump going to get defeated anyway? Because it doesn't matter whether you give them money or not, because the money they spend, is it really going to make a difference?
So I think this is really interesting. $6 billion is the projection, right, for this election cycle, 2020. That's a fair chunk of change, I'd say.
Yeah.
I don't have that under the mattress. Maybe Lance does, but
not to divert the show too much, but that wouldn't even make a dent in the national debt. So
right. No, I mean, so it's relative.
Put it in perspective.
Yeah. So one of the big ways to figure out if any of this strategy stuff works, is to do testing. And this article, again, you can follow along thestateofus.org. It's called Do Political Campaigns Change Voters' Mind? It says, to find out whether a campaign strategy works, the best solution is to use a randomized control trial. So in other words, we test a couple different groups of people. For example, you can randomly select certain neighborhoods to receive a campaign mailing supporting a particular candidate. If those areas vote for the candidate in greater numbers, it should be because the mailing influenced their choice. And in fact, a professor at Yale University tried just that in 2004, and he surveyed nearly 100,000 households, which is a huge sample size. Okay.
And obviously the bigger the sample size, the more correct the data and the findings are.
Right. The more accurate everything is. And the end result that the survey asked were the people more likely to vote for the candidate they received a mailing for? Not one bit. More precisely, they were 0.2% more likely to do so, which is statistically insignificant. The study was convincing because it was big, which is what we talked about before. So you send 100,000 people a mailer, and it changed 0.2% of their minds.
Nobody was affected by the mailer at all on who they were going to vote for.
Now, that's not the whole story. There's more to talk about here, but that's your little tidbit to be
teaser.
Chewing on over the break, right? You got 0.2% change, and we sent a mailer to 100,000 people, Lance. I don't know.
There we go.
That's a lot of paper to get 0.2%. A lot of money, too. So we're going to talk more about this and whether or not campaigns actually have an ability to change people's minds. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are the State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
A review piece in the Wall Street Journal says evidence shows that ads almost never affect us the way a personal conversation can. When we encounter a message that challenges our views, our first reaction is usually to reject it. So far, we've talked...
I'd have to agree with that. I mean, I'm only a sample of one, but I get mailers, and if it's from somebody or something that I don't support, I've already made up my mind about it. I don't read what they send me because, well, I don't believe it anyway. So it goes in the recycle bin.
So we've talked a little bit so far about the state of the race, right? What we think about how everybody's doing. The big question is, because Lance and I even talked about it some, the money component and what people are spending and who's moderate and who's not. Does any of that, will any of it matter come the general election? Can these campaigns spend enough money to do any good at convincing people to change their minds, or is the race already decided and we just don't know it? That's kind of what we're looking at now. Can political campaigns change voters' minds? And basically the long and short of this article, I think it goes on to explain that the examples and experiments that were conducted that had smaller sample sizes, so we talked about the one before the break with 100,000, their results were contradictory. And in one of them, mailings seemed to actually make people less likely to vote for a candidate. So had the opposite effect of what the goal was. I get so mad
that you're stuffing my mailbox with this stuff that I know I might have voted for you, but now I know I'm not.
That's right. Leave me alone. And it goes on to explain that the whole spectrum of campaign tools was covered in a broad range of studies from the American Political Science Review. That includes things like canvassing, phone calls, mailings. A few studies also focused on TV and online ads. The researchers' conclusion was unambiguous. Quote, "The best estimate of the effects of campaign contact and advertising on American candidates' choices in general elections is zero."
So all this money that they're putting on Facebook and all these internet ads is now, but you're talking when it comes to the general election.
Correct.
This is not talking about now with what we talked about when we talked about the primaries and the Democrats trying to, because here, right, I would say once we get to the general election, the majority of us have already decided who we're going to vote for. They're only going after, as we've always talked about, that middle 20%, right? The Republicans are going to get 40% no matter who they nominate. The Democrats are going to get 40% no matter who they nominate. So in the general, we're going after 20% of the voters. But when you talk about the primaries, it would lead me to believe that there is a little bit of a difference, that it does make, because people are trying to decide on who they want to support.
And the article does point that out. In fact, a mailing in a primary election increased the candidate's vote margin by 2.7%, which is a significant change. The main reason why campaigning is more effective in a primary is that voters can't rely on the typical shortcut of party identification, saying simply, quote, "I'll vote for the Republican" or "I'll vote for the Democrat." Voters also have weaker opinions and less information about the candidates than in general elections, and that makes them more amenable to persuasion as they learn new information about the candidates. So maybe, right, you are going to go vote in the Democratic primary, Lance, and you get a mailer about a candidate that you've only ever heard their name and it says they've got this great policy, and you're like, oh, I didn't know that, and now you're more agreeable to thinking about them as a candidate.
Yeah, these are the people that I like, so I haven't heard this one, so I'll sit down and read it. I actually give it some time. You know what I'm thinking about, and you're going to go ahead, and I want you to go ahead, but just for people to think about this. So does this mean that once we have our two candidates, we should have an election in like 2 to 4 weeks? Because all of this time and money that is spent and energy that's spent on telling us about the two candidates that we have to choose from really doesn't make a difference for us.
Well, and
but anyway, I just throw that out there. It's a rhetorical. Think about it. Go ahead and finish though as to what else you have left in the article.
The interesting thing is that it points out that there really hasn't been any research conducted on what happens when you combine these approaches, because generally in the world of advertising, it's well accepted that you have to reach people multiple ways, multiple times to make any difference. So part of the problem that I would immediately flag with any of these experiments is they tested one type of thing once on a select group of people. And in advertising, the rule of 7 is one that people commonly refer to. If you wanted the mailer to have any effect, you'd need to send it to them 7 times before it did any good. Or you need to combine it with at least 6 other forms of communication and reach those same people at least 7 times, you know, and at different numbers depending on who you ask. But generally, you have to reach them more than once. So, you know, we send one mailer to 100,000 people and it only changes 0.2%. I'd say that's not all that surprising.
You're not going to convince me the first time.
Right. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, Lance, I wear Allbirds shoes, which we've talked about before, you know, and now that I bought them, by God, I get ads all the time because they want me to buy more, you know, but I cannot go a week without seeing an ad on that, you know, so it's always at the forefront of my mind, boy, the moment that I'm going to buy a new pair of shoes, I know exactly who I'm going to buy from because they're the only brand that I ever see, you know, so I guess I don't want to minimize the fact that we don't really know just how much these things can affect people because you almost never see one of these things just once, you know? Sorry,
folks. I can't go to these hoity-toity shoes. I'm just a Converse high top kind of guy. Canvas shoe. Just.
But you care about the environment, right?
Yeah. Okay. I mean,
no. We're going to start.
I do, but not enough to change my shoes, I guess.
Oh, they're really comfortable. I think
you've
like
said
them.
That, but anyway,
maybe I'll buy a pair someday.
Yeah. Well, the redneck liberal just buys the cheapo shoes to cover his feet, and because we're going to go barefooted all summer anyway.
Hey, I only wore one pair of shoes all last year, so they last at least. There is that.
So does it matter?
So. Let's talk about online ads specifically, because this is an area.
That's where all
Cambridge
the money's
Analytica,
going.
right? You and I talked about that. And what about this? Because it sounded pretty scary.
And President Obama was lauded, you know, in all the circles as, oh, he's the one that took advantage of all, you know, sending out the tweets and the emails and everything else. And he recombobulated the whole process by using the internet. And everybody's followed his lead since 2008. So, yeah, how effective is that?
The article says, quote, there is no evidence that online political ads are any more powerful than old-fashioned TV spots. The effects of online ads are so small and variable that it is essentially impossible to measure their return. Now, it goes on to say...
But it's cheaper, wouldn't it be?
Yes.
You can reach more people. So it's a better use of your money, but it's really no more effective.
What about targeted advertising, which was famously used by the political consulting firm Cambridge Analytica in the 2016 presidential election? No one has any idea how to obtain even those small effects for political ads, not even Cambridge Analytica, whose work was, quote, pop psychology BS, according to Luke Thompson, who's the vice president for politics and advocacy at the Republican analytics firm Applecart, which he told the LA Times in 2018.
Interesting.
So that's one person's opinion.
Right. Doesn't mean it's the truth or, you know, but it is a studied opinion.
My takeaway here, Lance, is, and this is what it goes on to explain, and here's the key. All of this random stuff we do, and even the targeted stuff, is only useful when it's coupled with this. When we encounter a message that challenges our views, like being asked to vote for a candidate we don't already favor, our first reaction is usually to reject it. We change our minds only if we are provided with good arguments, ideally in the context of a discussion and from a source that we perceive as competent and trustworthy. When provided with the right reasons by the right people, however, we do change our minds. Professors Brockman and Kayla found a sweet spot in a 2016 study published in the Journal of Science, in which canvassers engaged people in a 10-minute conversation on transgender rights. They offered information and arguments and asked the voters to remember a time when they had been, quote, judged negatively for being different, end quote, so that they could better understand the plight of transgender people. This intervention reduced prejudice, and the changes seem to have been genuine as they were still present 3 months later.
Yeah, so you mean if you go out and people you know shake your hand and talk to you honestly about something, you're more likely to listen than if you just get a mailer or spam on your internet? Wow. I'm glad we spent money to figure that out.
So
I mean, you know, I being facetious, but in a sense, right? That's what it's all about.
Sure.
I mean, that's what we try to do here, right? Is just have these conversations with people. And if you trust us, we're just telling you what we found out. And it's like, you make up your own mind, and hopefully you challenge yourself to listen and to think. But I was also talking to, someone at school, and their father is older than me and very set in their ways. And since, he was talking about something along that lines of transgender, and they looked at their father and said, well, no, wait a minute. You love your grandkids, right? And of course I do. My grandkids are awesome. Well, what if one of your grandkids said and fit into what you just are so anti? And he goes, oh, would you just totally disown them? And he goes, well, no, they're my grandkids. And again, that's what that art in real terms, that's what the article was stating. If you sit there and you present somebody, if you're someone that somebody trusts and you present them in an idea or a concept that they hadn't thought of before, and you get them to think about it, then that's when you're going to have a chance of changing someone's mind, is when you can do it one-on-one and make it personal.
Right. Well, and I think the key here, though, too, is that the interesting thing is this canvassing effort, right, was people they didn't know, but the people took the time to engage them so that the people had a little bit more trust of these individuals.
Exactly.
Because I think that's what it comes down to is, I think you
didn't just send me a mailer or fly something at me. You took the time to come walk up my driveway and knock on the door and shake my hand and make eye contact with me and speak to me.
And listen.
Right.
That's the other big one,
and listen to my response. Right.
Yeah. Because the last thing that we want, and I think that's part of the problem with some of these efforts, is they're at you, right? And it's not a two-way. I don't know how many times I've said that on this show, but
excellent point.
There's not a back and forth. And without the back and forth, people don't change their minds very often. So I think it's safe to say, Lance, it definitely has its place. It's not totally worthless, right? At the same time, it probably doesn't have the effect that many of us are led to believe that it does. All this political advertising and spending. Or
that the marketing agents are selling to the politicians or the political parties to get their money from them.
Right. Something like that. So Lance, you were talking about that's part of what we're trying to do here today, right? So what is that mission that True Chat, the company that produces this program, is pursuing?
Well, the mission here at True Chat is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations.
And if people want to read this for themselves, they can go to thestateofus.org, which has some other great resources too, Lance, because this is a syndicated radio program. It's a podcast, so there's a lot of different ways to tune in. What are some of those ways that our listeners could bring somebody else into the fold, right? Invite somebody else to tune in.
Well, if they've got their phone out or their device out, they could go to Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or anywhere else fine podcasts are found.
Because if you listen to this as a podcast, right, you actually get it before everybody else gets it on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Right. Before it comes out on the local radio station.
Right, on the weekends. So definitely check out thestateofus.org for all the different ways to tune in, articles, books. We've got some interesting stuff coming up in that regard too. So keep up to date there. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.